wrote the first draft of this story when I was like 18 or 19. I was in college when I wrote this story. And I wrote it for my grandfather, who I never met. He died in 1960. But he was a perfume nose, and the story is about a perfume nose. Although the story is about a fancy perfume nose, and my grandfather was kind of a low-rent perfume nose. What he did actually was that he would, sniff expensive fragrances and then mix copies of expensive fragrances and like make sort of like down market copies of this stuff. I don't know if you all remember the perfume White Shoulders. Yeah. He like made a knockoff of that. It's pretty awesome. So that was his job, was copying like nice perfumes and making the stuff that you would see, like at, I don't know,
50s.
Yeah, Walgreens or whatever, where it's like alabaster clavicle instead. And actually, he died young. Actually, it's a sad story. Being a low-rent perfume nose was not very lucrative. But he had a very sensitive smell and taste, and actually the next job he took after that to make more money for his family was as a taste bud. So he would mix fake flavors to, like, let's make this fake crap taste like strawberries, and he would put that together, and he actually was poisoned to death by a coffee flavor. So next time you have a coffee flavor, you can say, "Hi, Alvin." Sorry, man. Yeah. So his name was Alvin. The boy in the story is named Alvin, and I just wrote it for my grandpa.
The story is called Vanity, and it will be read by Geoffrey Neill.
Vanity. The other noses Carmine worked with had all descended from carefully cultivated genetic lines. Their fathers before them were noses. They came from families in which their uncanny gift was well tended, sometimes maintained and enhanced through intermarriage with other known nose lines, sometimes through another practice they seldom liked to discuss, a practice copied from royalty, from pharaohs. The inbreeding gave some of them a particular look, one pale, delicate, and faintly unsettling, like a rare poisonous tropical plant or captive deformed animals that could never survive alone in the wild. Carmine did not have this look. He was an unusual occurrence, a complete anomaly in a normal family. When he was 4, he asked his mother, "Why do women bleed?" "What do you mean? I don't know what you mean." "Ma, you are bleeding right now. I can smell it on you." This was how it was known that Carmine had an acute sense of smell. He had sniffed out menses on women. Because it was such a bodily thing, his gift was more than faintly shameful. It would have been better if he'd been very good at math or a music prodigy. As it was, his family didn't know what to do with him. There was no conservatory, no special academy where they could send him, no recitals where they could show him off. The other boys at school laughed at his sensitivity and his fussiness. They said his mother must have bred with the family dog to make him, but they did not use the word breed. They asked him to track things by scent like a bloodhound. Had the request been made kindly, he might have obliged them. He only wanted to belong. When he was hired by the perfumery in a tall building in a vast city, Carmine thought he had found his place. There would be others there like him, and they would welcome him to their circle. Except they did not, because he was from the outside. He was a freakish mutt who happened to display the defining characteristic of the purebreds, and they, with their fine sensory organs, did not recognize him as one of their own. They did not invite him to drinks or propose arranged dates with their young female relatives to preserve the gift through their lines, Over time, Carmine grew used to the situation and even developed a bearing that demanded distance. Nothing prickly, just a tiny dignity, like a school teacher or the mayor of a small town. One that made everyone call him Mr. Carmine, even the ones above him. He had a first name, but if anyone there ever knew what it was, they had long forgotten. So it was, until one day Carmine grew restless. Perhaps it was a look at his graying hair in the mirror one morning that suddenly crushed him under the years of his loneliness. His restlessness guided him towards one of the secretaries, not his own. A woman no longer in the first bloom of youth, with a face plain enough that the other noses, who married only for the perpetuation of their gift, did not consider her for a dalliance. Carmine decided that he found her mouth expressive, that he liked the smell of her. It was golden and warm, like a pound cake just out of the oven, with just a tangy undercurrent of salt to clash against the sweetness and make it interesting. He took her out for coffee. There was no kiss, but she seemed to like him well enough. After, he was in a daze, thinking of what it would be like if they were to marry. Surely she would quit her work at the perfumery to be his wife. She would make an asylum for him away from the other noses, a place where he would undoubtedly belong, a real home. Perhaps there might even be children. What a thought! Carmine did not care whether his offspring had his gift or not, did not care whether they might continue his legacy at the perfumery. They would be free to do whatever they desired with their lives. They would be pieces of him, but unfettered by his burdensome sensitivity, his awkwardness. Carmine's next move would have been called ill-advised, or at the very least somewhat too bold by a more consummate practitioner of romance. He did not ask the woman he wanted for another coffee, or maybe a dinner out. Instead, he wrote her an overlong letter that all but proposed betrothal, in which he declared that he was working on a perfume made especially to complement the scent of her, a perfume he would be glad to name after her if she allowed. He signed the letter with his first name and slipped it into the company mail in the spirit of a man jumping off a cliff, hoping there would be a warm, welcoming ocean at the bottom to catch him, endless blue to carry him along, not slick, final, jagged rocks. The next morning, Carmine went downstairs to check his mail. Usually it was his secretary who went and brought the mail back to the desk, but that day was different. His body was all bound up, downright twitchy with fear. It was the giving of his first name that had done it to him, that had kept him up most of the previous night. Had he not done that, he might have been able to tolerate the woman's indifference. But he had, and now his mailbox was his soul's crucible. Carmine was an unusual enough presence in the mailroom that several employees turned their heads to watch him pass. When he got to the wall of cubbyholes, a young lad was standing there with a box of letters at his feet, grabbing them in bunches and flinging them with offhand expertise into their proper slots. His presence there and his young, unassuming back were almost enough to make Carmine turn on his heel and walk away without checking what he had come to check. But before he could do that, the boy said, without turning around, "There's no mail for you yet today, Mr. Carmine." "How did you know it was me?" "You're the one upstairs working on the jasmine perfume, aren't you? I can smell it from here." It was strange. Carmine didn't recall getting any of the mixture on himself. He breathed in and smelled it only faintly, a minuscule, quiet note beneath the racket of sweat, paper, and ink that was the mailroom. "You can smell that?" Carmine said. "Sure, it's kind of nice," the boy replied, and turned around to look at him with limpid gray eyes. "Thank you." For a moment they faced each other quietly. "Nothing for me then?" Carmine said quietly. "Nothing. Good day then." Carmine worked in the laboratory for the rest of the day. He didn't go back to the mailroom. The boy had unsettled him. He didn't even go back to his office to ask his secretary if anything had come in. He stayed holed up with his vials of extracts, composing. He recalled the warm scent of the skin of the woman he wanted, a skin he had never touched. He had smelled perfumes on women that clashed badly with their body's own natural fragrances, a clatter that made him cringe like a finely tuned musician subjected to a blast of discordant notes. But for the woman he wanted, there would be a perfume just for her, one that would render her intoxicating, a perfect symphonic chord, a swoon of heat and light promising an ambrosial taste. Oh yes. A perfume that she would not be able to wear to work, as the perfumery forbade all fragrances on its employees, from the mailroom to the penthouse, in order not to taint and disturb the fine organs of the noses. At the end of the day, Carmine went back to his desk to fetch his suit jacket and leave. A few letters were on his desk. There was nothing of interest. The mailroom supervisor was surprised when Carmine asked him about the boy. "Which boy?" he said. "We got more than one down here." "Very young, with gray eyes." "Oh, you mean Albin." "Albin." "Yes, Albin what?" "His last name? Damned if I can remember. Some Polak name with too many letters." Carmine winced slightly at the slur. "We don't mean much by calling him that," the supervisor said. "He's a sweet kid. We like him well enough." "Have you noticed if he has a sharp nose?" "What?" "He has a kind of a round nose, if you ask me." "No, I mean, does he have a very acute sense of smell? Can he smell things?" "What? I don't know. It's not really what I think about in my spare time, if my boys can smell things." Carmine sighed. He was about to give up when the supervisor mentioned, "He won't eat spicy sausage with us at lunch. He says it burns. A little bit of a pansy, if you ask me, but like I said, a sweet kid." A delicate palate. Carmine had one also. He also could not eat anything spicy. He was even overwhelmed by things that were pungent without being spicy, like coriander. A mouthful of bitter insects, that stuff. A delicate palate. A delicate palate often is a side effect of a sensitive nose. This new knowledge about Albin made Carmine's starched white shirt collar feel suddenly tight around his neck. He went to the bathroom to be alone and get a hold of himself. He stood before the mirror, his face flushed and warm, and undid his burgundy silk tie. When he saw his flustered reflection, a half smirk crept onto his face. "You look like a boy," he said to himself. The odor of human effluvia overwhelmed him. He couldn't stay here and inhale it all the way into the back of his brain where it might permanently etch itself, but he couldn't bear the thought of redoing the tie just now, of feeling that constriction around his neck, so he did an unusual thing. He went back to his desk with his tie undone, its tail ends fluttering down his chest as he walked. His secretary looked up at the strange sight of an untidy Carmine blustering his way into his office with no greeting, shutting his door behind him with no comments. Had she dared, she would have asked him what was the matter. In the laboratory, Carmine kept a faceted shot glass at his workstation, along with a sealed jar of whole coffee beans. He used these throughout the day when he needed to clear his nostrils between blasts of fragrance. Inhaling their crispness refreshed his sense of smell so he could go back to his work anew. It was a common trick in his profession. He threw the beans away when he left at night and put new beans in the glass the next morning. Tipping the shot glass into the trash that night, Carmine thought of the boy, Albin, the boy with no last name. The sight of Carmine in the mailroom was unusual enough, but the sight of him there twice in one week was downright aberrant. A gaunt boy with a mop of disordered black hair stopped dead in his tracks to look at him. Carmine smiled and asked the lad, who reeked of cigarettes and a splash of malt liquor, if he smelled anything. "What? No, sir, I don't smell anything." "All right. Do you by any chance know where Albin is?" Carmine asked. "Over there, logging in mail." Albin stood at the counter going through a stack of letters, logging the company's outgoing mail into a register bigger than a Bible. His brown hair was swept hastily back, and the black smears on the cuffs of his pants gave off the viscous, penetrating odor of motor oil. How he had gotten that on himself, who could know? Carmine tapped him on the shoulder, muttering practically in his ear, "Hey, Albin, Do you smell something? Albin shrugged. Nothing unusual. Well, what's the usual? The boy put his pencil down and looked up as if to retrieve his thoughts from above. Lots of paper and ink and some glue, he said. Sweat, all kinds. The kind in clothes, the kind on skin, the kind in hair. The mishap with the delivery truck this morning on my pants. The cold coming off the concrete floor. And you're still working on the jasmine, Mr. Carmine. I like that sandalwood you added. And Barnaby just farted. Barnaby, who was a few feet away, turned around. Hey, who the hell told you it was me? Barnaby, no one else who works down here eats as much cheese as you do, the boy placidly remarked. Carmine inhaled and laughed in a way he hadn't in a long time. Freely, without putting his hand up to his mouth to hide his smile. You like sharp cheddar, eh, Barnaby? He teased. Barnaby shot them both a dirty look and walked away, grunting. Carmine put both hands in his pockets, a feeling welling up within him. With his right hand, he felt the cool cylinder of his fountain pen. On impulse, he grabbed it and uncapped it with a flick of his thumb without taking it out of his pocket. He waited for the aggressive odor of a fountain pen ink to waft up to his nostrils. He gave the smell a few more seconds to travel, while Albin thought the conversation was over and picked his pencil back up. Do you smell anything else? Do you smell anything else? Carmine asked. The boy looked at him, straight at him, his gray eyes reaching into the man's very center. There's a fountain pen in your pocket filled with black ink, he said, enunciating each syllable with care. Carmine hardly believed his ears. Was it possible that the boy was so sensitive that he could tell ink colors apart by scent across the room? He nearly gasped. How did you know the ink was black? Because, Mr. Carmine, the ink is leaking. Carmine looked down at his pants and saw the tiny black stains spreading on the cloth from the inside of his pocket. What foolishness. He hastily took the pen out of his pocket and recapped it while walking away without another word. I don't think there was any mail for you today, sir, the boy called out after him in his clear young voice. Carmine had to fumble to find the light switch in the basement locker room. He'd never ventured there before that night. Everyone was gone. The place was eerily quiet, musty smelling. The boy's locker was off in a corner. Instead of the tiny name placard that most employees had, his had a piece of yellow masking tape that read in a tight scrawl, Albin W. Whoever had made that perfunctory tag for the boy had not even attempted to spell his nearly vowel-free last name. There was no lock. Did Albin even use this locker? The rusty metal door squeaked when Carmine opened it. The inside of the locker smelled moist and metallic, with faint remains of vinegar, suggesting that the boy at least used the place to stash his bagged lunch and that there were pickles in his sandwich that day. A wilted blue work shirt hung loosely from the hook at the top. Carmine bent over and, with his fingertips, placed a single coffee bean in the most recessed corner of Albin's locker in the dark where the boy would not be able to see it. Carmine could hardly sleep that night, picturing Albin running upstairs with a single coffee bean cradled in the palm of his hand, his young face beaming, eager to be taught all the wonderful secrets of being a nose. Like him, he did not come from a long and illustrious line. Like him, he was an anomaly. Like him, he was no one from nowhere. He would be, and here Carmine could hardly breathe under the weight of this thought, like a son. Oh no, something entirely other than a son. Another red blood among the blue bloods, an ally, a kernel for a dream. The first in a gathering that would bring a great burst of new life into the ossified perfumery, make the blue bloods run red. Oh, vanity. Carmine chided himself. The most he could possibly hope to do is taint the blue bloods ever so slightly indigo. How could such a tiny result be worth so much upheaval to his carefully constructed tranquility? By the morning, his heart had worked itself exhausted, and Carmine hated himself and his idiot fantasies. He was convinced that neither the boy nor the good-smelling secretary would ever acknowledge his existence again. How could he send 2 love notes out in the world at the same time? How had he forgotten that vulnerability was death? After getting into work, he anxiously peered out of his office door every quarter hour to ask his secretary if there was any mail for him or if any visitors came. "No, sir, not since the last time you asked me. I will fetch you if it changes," the secretary said flatly, looking up at him over her reading glasses. The fine hair framing her face radiated outwards in small flyaways, looking faintly electrified by what must have been her annoyance. There was nothing all morning. After lunch, he went down to the laboratory. The scent of his jasmine perfume made him dizzy, turned sour in his nostrils. He was no good. He was a fool. He should throw this ridiculous romantic impulse of a scent into the trash and work on some stately musk for the aftershave of executives. Still, he kept at it, working hours late. He would make this smell a good one. He would send it to marketing, but not name it after the woman he wanted, who clearly didn't want him. What should he call this new perfume? Failure. Foolishness. Absurd, lovelorn old man. A lone flare, then a quiet fade. Vanity. What did it matter what he called it? Marketing always overrode him anyway with some catchy thing they thought would sell better. Carmine made smells, not words. By the time he emerged, everyone in the perfumery had gone home. His office was dim and silent. He almost didn't see the 2 envelopes waiting for him on the desk when he went to take his jacket from the back of his chair, but there they were. There had been mail after all. The first envelope was addressed to him in a loopy female script and was just a touch thick, as if the woman he wanted had written several pages rather than just one. The terror and thrill of looking at it made the blood rush to his face, past the constriction of his tie. He was about to tear it open when the second envelope caught his eye. It was completely blank on the outside and was so light that it appeared empty. There was only a strange little bulge in the lower left-hand corner. When Carmine saw it, he put his hand up to his mouth to cover his smile, then nudged the thick envelope aside to get his hands on the strange new promise of the one that had almost nothing in it. He tore the envelope open swiftly, releasing the crisp, sharp, minuscule aroma of a single coffee bean.